Hello everyone and welcome back. If you have worked with Spring Boot 3 or its earlier version, you already know that calling an external service wasn't that difficult, but it was tedious. You had to create REST client, build proxy factory, and then wire everything together manually. Spring Boot 4 has significantly simplified the way we can call external HTTP APIs. In this video, I'll explain you how Spring Boot 4 has made your task way easier than its earlier versions. So, we'll start by calling the external APIs with Spring Boot 3 approach, and here we'll understand how tedious API calling used to be and understand the pain points here. And then we'll discuss how Spring Boot 4 enhancements have made it easier. So we'll have the same behavior, same APIs, just a much cleaner way of doing it. So let's go to start.spring.io and here we'll choose Maven and the Spring version that we'll be using is 3.5.8. We'll update the group as dev.rishabh and let's update the artifact name as Spring Boot 4 HTTP service client demo, and we'll also update the package name. Let's add the dependencies for web, and we'll also add the dependency for Lombok. So let's click on generate. So let's extract this. Okay, so we have got this extracted. Let's go inside this folder. We'll copy the path. Let's go to IntelliJ and we'll paste the same path. Select folder, new window and rest project. First of all, let me show you the pom.xml. So inside this, you can see the Spring version that I've chosen is 3.5.8 and the Java version is 17. We only have one dependency, WebMVC. Before we start writing any Java code, I'll walk you through the APIs that we'll be using in our video. All the APIs that we would be discussing here are public APIs, so you don't need any kind of authentication. So the first one is GitHub Milestone API. So this endpoint gives you the release planning information. Next API is GitHub Issues. This endpoint is extremely common in real system for bug tracking. And the next API that we have is from Stack Exchange to get all the questions from Stack Overflow. Alright, now that we have seen the APIs that we'll be dealing with, next we'll create Java classes to represent the API responses. So let's click on this raw data and we'll copy this full JSON object and let's go to IntelliJ. So let's create a package to add all these model and let's name this package as model. I'll be using IntelliJ's plugin RoboPojoGenerator to generate pojos from the JSON. Once you install this plugin and click on new, we'll be getting a new option as generate pojo from JSON. Let's click on this. Okay, let's click on Jackson for records. Let's paste the JSON here. I don't want to complicate the object that will be created, so I'll remove this creator. Let's also remove this HTML and label the URLs. Once you are done, click on generate. So let's update the name of the models. Let's name it to milestone. Click on refactor. Now we'll go back and see the raw data. For issues API, let's copy this. Once we have copied, we'll click on new, generate pojo from JSON, and we'll paste it over here. Let's add the closing braces. And here we'll update the name of the pojo as issues. Click on generate. Next, let's see the raw data for Stack Overflow API. So the response is inside this item array. So let's copy this, paste it over here. So we'll close the braces here and the array. Let's update the name of the class as question. Let's remove this owner and then click on generate. So we have got this question and it has a list of items, and we have got this item Pojo also. Now let's configure the base URLs for these API. We'll store them in the application.properties. So first of all, let's write down GitHub base URL, and we'll write down the property name as github.base.url, and we have got the API URL. Next, let's add the Stack Overflow base URL. We'll create interface that define what we want to call. These are like the contract. They say, I want to call this endpoint, but don't know how. Spring will create the implementation for us automatically. So first of all, let's create milestone service interface. This will define how to call GitHub milestone endpoint. Let's write down the package name as service.github.milestone service. So we'll be using get exchange over here. So this will make the get request to the part that we'll define. Similar to get exchange, you'll also have the endpoints like delete exchange, put exchange, or patch exchange. So you can choose the exact exchanges that you want according to the request that you have. So for me, I have a get request, so I'll choose @get exchange. And let me write down the path as repos. We'll mention the org, repo, and then the endpoint as milestone. This will return list of milestone, the pojo that we have created before. So the method name would be get milestone, and this will be accepting a path variable as org and the another one as repo. Now let's create an issue service. We'll follow the same pattern for a different endpoint. Again, we'll be using @get exchange over here. And inside this, let's write down the URL for issues. This will return list of issues. Again, this model is already created. We'll name this as get issues, and this will be accepting @path variable as org and another one as repo. Next, let's create question service for Stack Overflow. It will be inside service dot stack overflow, and let's name this as question service. Okay, the package name is incorrect here. Let's remove service.github. More actions, move to this package. Okay, again we'll be using @get exchange over here. We'll write down the path as /questions. This will return question. Question service is a bit different. Stack Overflow uses query parameters instead of path variable. To pass the query parameter, we'll be using @request param. Let's pass the site name, string site. So this service is also complete. Now that we have created all the services, we'll create a REST controller to expose these APIs as HTTP endpoints. This will let us test our HTTP service client through our own API. Let's use @REST controller here. Let's define the base URL using @request mapping /API/service. Next, we'll be using required args constructor from Lombok. Now we'll be auto-wiring all the services that we have created. To do that, let's write down private final, milestone service, milestone service. Next, we'll write down private final, issue service. issue service. And the last one is question service. Now that we have auto-wired all the services, let's expose them via endpoint. So to do that, we'll write down at the rate get mapping. So the first one is slash milestone. This will accept org and repo. Public. This will return response entity. Get milestone. This will accept path variable as string org. Let me accept the session from Copilot. We'll move this to another line. Okay, let's select this milestone service.get milestone and we'll directly paste it inside the response entity. Let's create another get mapping for issues. So you can see our Copilot is giving us correct suggestions. So let me accept this. Let's move to the questions endpoint. This will again be a get mapping. Let's remove the site from here. Here we'll be getting the request param, value as site, and the default value as Stack Overflow. So let's pass the site in the get questions. Let's move this to above line. Now at this point, everything looks correct. We have service interfaces, we have controllers, we have models. So let's run the application and see what happens. Run this application. It's building. And now you can see we have got this error. So Spring is telling something very important. We defined HTTP interfaces for services, but Spring has no idea how to auto-wire them into the controller. Interfaces don't magically become beans here. Spring Boot 3, we have to manually configure them. So let's do it now. So to do that, we'll be creating a new config class. Let's name this as traditional service config. We'll annotate this with @configuration. First of all, let's add the base URL for GitHub, private string, GitHub base URL. We'll be getting this base URL from the application.properties that we have defined. So let's write down @value dollar GitHub base URL. So we've got this from Copilot. Again, let's define the base URL for Stack Overflow, private string, Stack Overflow base URL. And again, we'll be using @value over here. So first of all, in order to hit the APIs, we'll have to create REST client. So here we'll be creating two REST clients, one for GitHub and the other for Stack Overflow. So for the first one, let's write down public REST client, GitHub REST client, and we have got the correct session from Copilot. We'll annotate this with @bean. Next, let's create another REST client, @bean. So we have created a bean for Stack Overflow REST client. In order to create a bean for the services that we have created, we'll have to create REST client adapter, which wraps the REST client. Next, we'll have to create the HTTP service proxy factory that create proxies for the beans that will be responsible for creating the service instances. First of all, let's create a bean for milestone service, public milestone service, milestone service. This will accept GitHub REST client that we have created. So first of all, let's create the HTTP service proxy factory. This will create the proxy implementation for our interfaces. .builder for. Inside this, we have to pass the adapter that wraps REST client to work with the HTTP service clients. And let's build this factory. So the create client will create the object implementations for milestone service. This object is registered as Spring Bean. Now Spring can inject it in a Spring controller. Similarly, we'll be creating the services for issues, public issue service, and we have got the suggestion from Copilot. Let me accept this. Okay, we'll have to annotate this with @bean. Similarly, we'll be creating a bean for question service. And again, we have got the suggestion from Copilot. We'll accept this also. So first of all, look at this code. We have written almost 60 lines of code just to create three services. And we have to repeat this pattern for every service. So this is a lot of boilerplate code that you have to write down in order to hit any external APIs. Now that we have done this, let's go to the main class and run our application. And yes, our application is started now. Let's go to the browser and we'll hit our API. So the first one for the milestone works. Let's hit the another API for issues, and this also works. Let's hit the another one for Stack Overflow. So all our three APIs works perfectly. Okay, we are able to get data from GitHub and Stack Overflow. But look at the code that we had written. 60 plus lines of code for just doing the configurations. But what if I told you that Spring Boot 4 can create all these HTTP REST clients automatically just by looking at your interface? No factories, no adapters, no duplicate configurations. So let's upgrade and see how much code we can delete. So first of all, let's go to pom.xml. Here, we'll update the version to 4.0.0. Let's scroll down. And here, instead of starter web, let's write down starter web MVC. Though startup web will also work. You can upgrade the Java version if you want, but Java 17 also works fine. Now let's go to traditional service config, and here you can see it does two things. It gives the base URL to this milestone service and also creates a bean out of it. Next, let's go to the milestone service. In Spring Boot 4, we can put the base URL directly in the interface using @HTTP exchange. This makes it self-documenting. You can see the API URL right in the interface. So let's write down @HTTP exchange and we'll put the base URL for GitHub. Let's go to application.properties and we'll copy this API base URL, paste it over here. Okay, so let's copy this full HTTP exchange and go to issue service. We'll paste the same base URL over here as well, as both are from GitHub. Next, for Stack Overflow, let's write down HTTP exchange. And inside this, we'll pass the API URL for Stack Exchange. Let's update the name of this traditional service to traditional HTTP service config. Let's create a new service config and we'll name this as modern HTTP service config. Again, we'll annotate this with @configuration. So the task of this configuration class would be to create beans for the services that we have created. So to do that, we'll be using import HTTP service. It tells Spring, here are the HTTP service interfaces. Please create implementations for them. We'll do the same for issue service and again the same for question service. Next, let's go to traditional config. We'll select the class and comment everything here. You see that the configuration class is empty, and that's not a mistake here. That's the point. You don't have to do anything over here. Just you can try running the application again. It's building. And yes, it has started. And you can see we have got no errors over here. Let's refresh the URLs. The first one for Stack Overflow, it works. Everything is there. Do it for issues APIs as well. This also works. And the one for milestone all three of them works. Now let me introduce you to grouping of the interfaces. Notice that milestone service and issue service both have the same base URL as they belong from GitHub. And yes, we can group them together. This makes the configuration even cleaner and more organized. So let's write down import HTTP service. We'll be using group is equal to, let's name this as GitHub, and let's mention the base package. So all the services that are created inside this base package will be a part of a group called GitHub. Again, let's create another group and we'll name this group as Stack Overflow. We can remove rest of the import HTTP services that we have created before. Let's also delete these imports. Okay, let's try running the application and see if we are getting some errors. No errors are there. Okay, and the APIs also works correctly. Okay, so again, we have reduced one line of code by grouping the URLs together. So now let's refine it further. Right now, the base URLs are hard coded in the HTTP exchange annotation. That's fine, but we can make them configurable. Let's try to read all those URLs from application.properties and we'll be configuring these base URL from our configuration file. Let's go back to modern configuration class. So in order to use configuration based URLs with groups, we need to add a configurer bean. This connects the group to the base URL in the application.properties. So let's write down @bean REST client HTTP service group configurer. We'll write down group configurer over here. So this will be returning all the groups here. Let's create a lambda over here. First of all, we'll configure the GitHub base URL groups.filter by name, and we'll be passing the name of the first group as GitHub. Next, for each client, let's move this to another line. This will be accepting a callback for client and the builder for the API. So we'll write down builder.base URL. So you can see I've got the comment as configure stack overflow base URL. And let's accept all the sessions from Copilot. Okay, so we have configured both of our groups. Apart from just writing the base URL, you can also define a lot of properties based on the groups. So you can define the default headers, cookies, versions. I don't want it, so I will not be defining it further. So if you want to add some kind of authentication based on the group, you can do it over here. Okay, one thing that we have made a mistake here is we have again hard coded the API URLs. So let's get them from the application to properties. To do that, let's use @value dollar GitHub base URL, and this will be named as GitHub base URL. Let's accept the Stack Overflow base URLs also. We'll remove the hard-coded base URL and write down the variable names. Same for Stack Overflow also. Let's restart the application. And yes, it works. Perfect. All our API endpoints are working. Now, look at the results. Same APIs, same application, and same results. But now we have less code, less duplication, easier maintenance, and cleaner architecture. This is kind of change that doesn't just save time, it changes how you can design your systems. So, if this helped you understand HTTP clients and Spring Boot better, hit like. If you want more deep dive like this, you can consider subscribing to our channel. And if you have any questions, then you can comment below and I'll surely reply to each one of you. So, see you in the next one.